Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Out of the Box, Effective Feedback for the Iterative Assignment. Today's offering was originally presented at the July 2018 National Faculty Meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The presenters, Dr. Heidi Marshall and Dr. Joe Gredler, will be presenting again today. As you can see, Dr. Heidi Marshall is a core faculty member in the Academic Skills Center, and Dr. Joe Gredler is a dissertation editor in the Writing Center and also a lead faculty member in the Academic Skills Center. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Marshall. Welcome.
Great, thank you so much, Lida, and welcome everybody who is viewing this webinar. First, I'm going to go through our agenda. You've just heard our introductions. We're going to give you a little background on the problem. So what prompted Joe and I to look at the difference between providing feedback to students via the Blackboard Box feature or via Microsoft Word. We're going to talk a little bit about that, what prompted us. Then we're going to do a brief comparison of Box and Word. Joe's going to provide you some empirical evidence. This is from his own research, and talk a little bit about the context of what we found within the Academic Skills Center specifically, which we're hoping might prompt some ideas for you and your own courses and perhaps programs. We're going to review the discussion that we had during the live session, and we're also going to give you a quick demo of Box versus Word as well. And then we'll wrap up with some applications for practice. So what we have found is that Blackboard's Box grading tool has some significant limitations, particularly when we are thinking about improving students' writing skills, which is obviously what we are doing in the Academic Skills Center. Joe and I both teach courses related to graduate writing, so graduate writing 1 and 2, as well as the dissertation writing courses. So when we're providing feedback to our students, our main goal is to foster learning related to writing. And for that, it's a really, it's often an iterative process throughout the course, and it requires a lot of modeling and explaining to students. And what we lose when we're trying to do that within Blackboard's Box grading tool is the ability to model edits for students. We can insert comments, certainly. We can make those comments proximal to the particular area of the student's writing that we're speaking about. But again, we can't model what it is we're talking about. And we see that as a very big limitation for the type of feedback that we're providing to students. It also, the Box grading tool is a bit clumsy for students themselves. So when they want to view our feedback in Box, they have to open it, click on each individual comment. It's very difficult. It's, I think, just a very new feature that they're even able to download the paper that they have with those comments in them. They're not easily viewable. And so that often means that students either need to have a dual monitor set up, or they're clicking back and forth from one application to the next to see the feedback and then to apply it in their paper to show improvement and revision. So these are some of the limitations that we found, and that prompted, again, us to look at this in a bit more depth. One of the pros of using the Box feature is that it does enable faculty to give feedback much more quickly. So it eliminates the need for us as faculty to have to download a paper, save it, and then re-upload it for students. It certainly is a time saver for faculty. But again, it doesn't, but just because it's a time saver for faculty and it makes our jobs easier does not necessarily mean it's the best tool for providing instructive writing feedback to our students. That said, as we're going to discuss here in just a minute, we're not here to convince you not to use the Box feature, because there are some assignments for which it's perfectly appropriate. If it's a non-iterative assignment, an assignment where you are providing feedback on content, overall assessment of a student's content knowledge, then I think Box can be a really solid tool for that. But again, for what we're talking about, and our target here would be working with faculty who are also working with students on an iterative assignment. So maybe that's one draft of their capstone to the next, or something where they're really building from one week to the next on the same assignment. So here's a quick comparison of what we found between Box and Word. As I mentioned, it is an efficient tool for faculty. It certainly makes our lives a lot easier, and you don't have to do any downloading and re-uploading. It does allow you to place comments immediately adjacent to what it is you are commenting on, which is nice. As students click on the comment, and generally if it's well placed, they understand what you're talking about. But as we mentioned, I think one of the biggest limitations of Box is that you do not have the ability to do those line edits. And when we say line edits, we don't mean edit the document for the student, but what we tend to do in the Academic Skills Center is model an edit that we're explaining. So if we are trying to explain to a student how to appropriately cite a source, we will model how to do that using the Microsoft Word track changes and line edit functions to model what we are discussing. We are then able to also highlight text to show the repetition of that error to the student. So the student begins to learn that often in writing, it's not a one-time error, it's a pattern of errors, and learn how to correct for those. Another downside of Tool is that even when students can download that feedback, it's in a PDF document. So there is still a back and forth that they need to do in order to incorporate that feedback into their document, because we're asking them to submit their work in a Microsoft Word document, but we're providing feedback in a PDF. And so that's requiring them to go back and forth between those two applications. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe to talk a little bit more about the background of our problems and the evidence that we heard.
Thanks, Heidi. So the primary empirical justification for the changes made recently in the Academic Skills Center were the findings from my dissertation study completed in 2016. The 2018 publication is a journal article version, which was published in the International Journal of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education just a few months ago. So in my study, I explored post-secondary online students' preferences for instructor feedback. I wanted to know what students wanted, and I wanted to know why they wanted particular types of feedback. So on the what side, by the way, I collected data from Walden students, and my sample was a little under 100 students, so it wasn't as big as I had hoped it would be, but it was sufficient to achieve publication. So what I found on the what side was that students prefer detailed, supportive, proximal feedback. By that I mean comments posted adjacent to the relevant paragraph text. Students also reported that they prefer the use of track changes, which Heidi mentioned on the previous slide. Those are the inline edits that we can do in Word, but not in Box. That's one of the important differences, and one of the reasons why we're encouraging you to use Word for iterative assignments so that you can more effectively model recommended changes and show students what needs to be done as far as grammar, mechanics, APA style, and then also include proximal comments in the form of balloon comments in the margins to explain what you've done and to help students internalize that feedback. So in answering the why question, I found that the primary reason students wanted proximal, detailed, supportive feedback, including the use of rubrics and track changes, was to get better at writing. They wanted to promote their writing skills, and they explained in the qualitative data that they wanted this particular type or that particular type of feedback so they could improve their skills. They also wanted proximal, detailed, supportive feedback to justify point deductions. It's easier, according to students, to understand why points were deducted if particular edits are made and if particular proximal comments are included at the point of issue, so as to help the student understand exactly what the problems were and how to remedy them going forward. And that's particularly important in an iterative assignment. One of the other reasons why is to provide evidence that the paper had been read. Some students indicated that without proximal, detailed, supportive feedback, there's no clear evidence that the instructor had carefully read the assignment. And finally, students wanted proximal, detailed, supportive feedback to promote learning despite receiving a good score. In other words, students who received a perfect score on assignment still want that important feedback so that they can improve their skills. So based on this research, in the Academic Skills Center earlier this year, we took a change of course in policy. And essentially, we argued that creating logistical barriers to incorporating feedback on iterative assignments is not in students' best interest. And by that, we mean through the use of Box. As Heidi described earlier, it's a little clunky and clumsy for students to go back and forth between Box feedback and their Word documents. It can be appropriate for assignments that don't require a great deal of line edits or in paragraph comments, but for iterative assignments, especially at the capstone stage, it's better for instructors, we argue, to use Word because it's easier for students to receive that feedback, apply it, internalize it, and improve their skills. So in the Academic Skills Center, what we have now required faculty to do is use Microsoft Word only in weeks 2 through 7 of the graduate writing course. And that's because the student is working on an iterative assignment. She or he is starting with an outline and then producing a draft, and each week working on that draft based on feedback, adding to it based on assignment instructions, and building toward a final draft for week 7. So for weeks 2 through 7, we require faculty to use Word because it's the student-centered tool. In weeks 1 and 8, students are submitting reflective essays in which they are analyzing their skill sets, identifying strengths and points of improvement. And for those assignments, we argue that it's okay for faculty to use either Box or Word. The same applies in the dissertation workshops. In weeks 2 through 5, students are submitting portions of their capstone manuscripts, and they're working directly on the documents that they're submitting to their faculty. So it's an iterative process. And for that reason, we require faculty in weeks 2 through 5 to use Microsoft Word. However, in weeks 1 through 6, once again, students are writing reflection essays. And so Box is acceptable. Word is preferred, but Box is acceptable. We have not done extensive research on whether other programs have implemented something similar to what has been done in the Academic Skills Center. However, at this point, we opened up the conversation to our audience members, and we asked them if they were being encouraged by their program directors to use Word in certain circumstances or Box in certain circumstances. And we found some interesting things, which we'll discuss later on when we broach the table discussion topics. Right now, I'm going to send it back to Heidi, and she is going to do a demonstration of how Box is used in the Blackboard platform and also how Word is used, and illustrate some of the comparisons and contrasts made earlier in the presentation.
Great, thank you, Bill. So I just want to verify. So can you see the box that I have on screen?
And Heidi, we're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. You're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to quickly demonstrate, for those of you, what we found when we were presenting this webinar at NFM as well as our live webinar is that although a lot of faculty have been exposed to and experienced the use of Box, not all have used this grading tool. We know there are just a few lingering courses out there who are not using this function yet. So we do want to demonstrate quickly what we are referring to when we are talking about how to provide feedback to a student in Box. So when a student uploads their paper, submits their assignment in Blackboard, it is brought into the grading area. And then when you click on their name to open up their grade attempt, the assignment loads here in Box. So currently there are, you would click here, you can draw annotation mode, or you can insert a comment. So you can point here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the editing here. As you can see, I already placed one comment here. So unlike Microsoft Word, where if a student is in viewing all feedback mode, that comment would automatically appear in the margin. Within Box, a student has to click on each comment and then click out of it in order to see the next comment. And the same when you are providing feedback to a student. So let's say I wanted to provide some feedback on this overall paragraph. I would point here. Oops. Type in my comment and then click on post. All right, then you need to click out and you'll see that the comment then goes down into a blue comment bubble. So as we've mentioned, this is an effective tool for providing sort of higher order feedback on a more general sense in a student's paper. So again, maybe paragraph by paragraph, the paper as a whole, you can provide some comments. Certainly as well, when you are entering your grade, you have the option to provide feedback to your learner in that grading area. What we're not able to do is, if I notice here, there's this Microsoft Word this APA error, and I wanted to correct this, I would click on that comment, and certainly I could model it here for the student and explain why I did that post, but that is still then an extra step for the student to go back and create that edit. So I'm lacking that ability to actually model what it would look like within the sentence for the student. We also know when students download this, these comment bubbles in the PDF themselves are then blocking out some of the text for the student when they're open. Sorry. And so we just see it as a rather limiting tool when your ultimate goal is to model really strong writing and to help students show improvement in their writing. So I'm just going to open now this same document in a Microsoft Word. So if I had downloaded this, and just to show you some of the modeling that we're able to do in Microsoft Word, so I can model it here. All right. And then I can click over and see each of the comments related to the modeling that I've done in the paper. All right. Here again, I've indented the first line for the student, so that edit appears there, and then I explain what I did. Here I've highlighted the last sentence, the last word of the paragraph to provide some overall feedback. Sometimes you'll see faculty highlight in an entire paragraph to provide overall feedback to them. But as Joe mentioned, what students are really craving is that optimal feedback. So the feedback that is really just attached to what it is specifically you are talking about. And that's where we see Box to be the most limiting, is modeling our feedback and really attaching a comment immediately to that model and to the error correction that we are pointing out. Joe, do you have anything else you want to add to this demonstration?
Sure, Heidi. One thing, you can adjust the settings in track changes so that when you're making edits, those are not pulled out in marginal comments. Mm-hmm. They just appear in text,
right.
Which makes it a little bit easier for students to see. Or you can do it any which way you prefer. What we encourage you to do is communicate with your students whenever possible to hear from them and be more student-centered. Find out from them what they prefer, what's working, what's not working. Help them, even with the word feedback. Sometimes students struggle a little bit. Help them adjust the settings so that they can better appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I would say one thing that we are privileged in the Academic Skills Center when we're teaching these courses is we tend to have a very small student enrollment in each of our courses. So we are able to establish a bit more of a relationship with students, asking, here is how I provided feedback. If you don't understand it, if you're having trouble with this style of feedback, please let me know. All right, we are going to switch back over. Our slides now and talk a little bit about what we found when we were talking about this with the faculty who were in our live sessions, as we did present these questions to those who were in attendance. And I think what we found is that, I would say probably the majority of the folks who were in our sessions had used Box in some function. None of the other programs, as far as we were able to tell, are doing a similar process as we are in the Academic Skills Center, as far as mandating to faculty to use Box or Word for particular assignments. So we are currently, as far as we know, the only program doing that. But that prompted some good discussion among the attendees regarding, when might it be most appropriate for faculty in their program to be using Word rather than Box. Joe, do you have anything to add here as far as the feedback we received during our sessions?
Yeah, at the NFM session, it was particularly interesting, Heidi, as you recall, how faculty reported their use of Box. And some faculty said they hadn't known about Box and they wanted to see a demo, so we did that at NFM. And we got faculty intrigued by it, presumably because it's a faculty-friendly tool. However, we reminded faculty to use that only in students' best interest. And when students are writing iterative assignments, we encouraged faculty to use Word because it's an easier tool for students to use to accept edits, reject edits, make additional changes, and work within the same document they used rather than going back and forth between a Box document and the Word document. A few faculty at the live webinar presentation reported that they were using Box at the capstone stage, which was interesting. That's contrary to what we recommend, but we were certainly open-minded and we listened to faculty justify their use of Box at that stage. And certain faculty prefer to include only comments rather than edits on proposal documents, and other faculty prefer to do more modeling, as Heidi described earlier. In our capstone workshops in the Academic Skills Center, we do both. Faculty include line edits, and then as Heidi demonstrated in the Word demo, we highlight those changes, and in a marginal balloon, we explain what we did and why. So students can actually see the change, and then in the marginal balloon, they can see the justification or the rule underlying that need for change. And hopefully they can see not only the what and the why and be able to then apply what they're learning to subsequent instances of a similar issue cropping up. So they can learn how to edit more effectively on their own, become better, more self-regulated writers. Heidi, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that was great. Thank you.
Okay, so what we encouraged faculty to do, once again, is to think about the assignments that they're typically administering in their courses and to consider whether Box or Word is the appropriate tool. And we reminded students, or excuse me, faculty for iterative assignments that we recommend the use of Word for all the reasons we've provided earlier. We also encouraged faculty to make sure students understand the technical nuances of both Box and Word, how to download PDFs from Box if students prefer to do that, and how to make sure that they're opening up Word attachments and viewing the edits and comments appropriately so that they can improve their skills. But overall, we encouraged faculty to consider using a student-centered approach whenever possible to accommodate students' preferences, and as indicated in my research study, to promote their learning process. The research problem that prompted my study was when I was doing some of the preliminary research, I read a few studies indicating that misalignment between students' preferences and instructor practices impedes learning. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, and it made me realize that I had not stopped to think about what my students want. I had not entertained their preferences at all. And so it's important for faculty to consider what students want and how they're receiving feedback, and to make sure that there's maximum alignment between what faculty are providing in the way of feedback and how students are receiving that feedback. And then once again, we encouraged faculty to prefer Word for iterative assignments. Anything else to add, Heidi?
No, that was great, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, here are some resources to wrap up our webinar for today. This is the journal article version of my study for those who might be interested in more of the details. And then the ASC faculty newsletter, Microsoft Word support in the Academic Skills Center is an excellent resource, as well as the Savvy Study, webinars, podcasts, newsletters, and more.
I want to give a big thank you
And
to our
Heidi?
presenters.
Go ahead, Lita.
Hi, I want to thank you both for presenting today. And Heidi, did you have any final comments before we stop the recording?
I don't. I think, our big takeaway, I think, is as Joe mentioned just now, is to really think about, what is in the best interest of your students and the intent of the feedback you're providing to each student. So as you're thinking about, what platform you might use, to really take those into consideration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Dr. Zredler and Dr. Marshall. It was great information. I personally am going to find it very useful in my classroom, and I know that the faculty watching right now will find it useful in their classroom. So thank you again. Thank you for presenting this at the National Faculty Meeting, and again today for our faculty that are watching the recording. Have a great day, everyone.